Hello and welcome to a rebuttal of one of the most asinine articles I have ever read. I wanted to create a channel to do rebuttals on, and no joke, this was the first article I ran across when looking up a article to do a rebuttal on. Now when I went in to deconstruct the article, I found things that I swear to you, if I did half of, my English professor would have been so pissed off that I might as well just drop the class right then and there. Clearly, no one ever read over this article before allowing her to publish it, because otherwise she would probably be writing an article for BuzzFeed right now about how her ex-boss was sexist for firing her over such a terrible article. Now, I'm not against equal rights or anything. Don't get me wrong, there are problems that women face in society, but this article is so profoundly stupid that it simply hurts my head. We are going to go through this article point by point, and I'm going to show you just how ridiculous of an argument that the author presents in the article. It's something that hurts her case more than it helps, to be honest, really, when you look into it and deconstruct it. But without further ado, let's get started. We are going to go through this article point by point, and I'm going to show you just how ridiculous of an argument that Alia E. Dastagir, or however you pronounce that name, I'll refer to her as the author for the rest of this rebuttal. But I'm going to show you just how ridiculous of an argument that she presents. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first few paragraphs here is more of just a background on the issue. She talks about the women's rights movement and how in 1977 the government asked what the women's rights movement wanted, but now with Trump in office, they are at jeopardy of losing those rights. It does not have much to do with the article itself, so being that's not the core argument of the article itself. It's only background information, introduction, so to speak, to the article. It is a good read if you want to see exactly where she is coming from on a standpoint of this issue. You can read it for yourself. The link to the article is in the description below. But like I said, it's not really relevant to the topic of the argument, what men have that women don't, and thus I'm not going to get into it. Her first point, health, from gains to wait and see. Acknowledging women's roles as primary caregivers, the 1977 conference named national health care as one of its federal priorities. In 2010, President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act, expanding coverage to millions of women, forbidding the denial of coverage based on gender, and guaranteeing access to birth control, maternity care, and breastfeeding supplies. The National Partnership for Women and Families called the ACA the greatest advance for women's health in a generation. And then Trump and Republicans in Congress vowed to repeal and replace it. First, I'd like to point out how in an argument where they're talking about what men have that women don't, the very first thing they bring up is something that they concede and say that women do actually already have that, and the only problem is that they're at fear of losing it. A fear of losing it is not really something that you should be arguing for, that men have that women don't, and you already have it. You can't. Whatever. Okay, moving on. I will concede that point. Basically, all they're saying here is that the Affordable Care Act was a big win for women, but now Trump might repeal it, so they are all afraid. And sure, like I said earlier, I will concede to it already being there, and the only problem is that you're afraid. Okay, I will concede to that. We can talk all day about the Affordable Care Act, but to keep it short, it is no revelation that the ACA is not meeting its promises. Deductibles have doubled, premiums have skyrocketed, and the "if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor" statement has been proven to be a complete lie. 5% of the population uses 50% of the insurance, and that's why Obamacare has been a bust. We want to cover the sick, but if you make a 25-year-old cover the cost of a 60-year-old with major health problems, the 25-year-old will not be able to afford other things he may need. So yes, it needs to be repealed and replaced with something that functions better. It's a good idea, but it just simply did not work out as it was intended to in the end. So will repealing and replacing it be a major blow to women's rights? I highly doubt it. Repealing and replacing a broken healthcare system is not going to hurt women's rights at all. So this is her next point in the argument. Sexual and domestic violence is still too common. I'm going to touch on the first point first, and then we'll move on to the second. Sexual and domestic violence, still too common. Yet there's more awareness and condemnation of violence against women than ever before, yet statistics still paint a grim picture. 1 in 3 women have been a victim of some form of physical violence by an intimate partner, according to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and 1 in 6 American women will be the victim of an attempted or completed rape, according to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. The Department of Justice reports that rates are even higher for transgender and bisexual women. The second point I'd like to make here is that you can always report sexual assault. That alone will solve the issue. I understand being too afraid to report about sexual assault, but if you don't report it, there's absolutely nothing that can be done to solve the issue. If you do report it, justice will come. Hell, even people who report it decades later, as you have seen in Hollywood, are still getting their justice. Weinstein, Spacey, that creep from the Olympics, everybody that has been accused in Hollywood are basically getting their careers ruined, and many of them are getting thrown behind bars. And keep in mind, many of these are decades later after it has happened. Report it, and it will no longer be as big of an issue as it may be. If 1 in 3 women have been a victim of physical violence and they all reported it, there would be so many people behind bars it wouldn't even be funny. So if 1 in 100 women reported it, the issue would be 100 times less worse than it is today. And going back to the title of the article, the author talks about what men have that women don't. Sexual and domestic violence is not something that men do not have to deal with, but women do. No, men are raped more often than women. This is something that men have that women don't, if anything. Both genders have to deal with this. It's not a woman's issue alone. And that alone, right there, that one point alone, that men are raped more often than women, dismisses this entire argument. This entire point is now going against her argument than for. So congratulations, the author of the article. I don't really remember how to pronounce her name. You played yourself. Now the rest of that section right there is basically Trump bashing. That first paragraph right there does not really have anything to do with the topic of the article or the argument itself. The second is just a quote, which I think is a bunch of bullcrap. She states, "You shouldn't have to be a man to walk down the street without worrying about being sexually assaulted." Well, if you're so worried about being sexually assaulted, you can go get pepper spray or even a gun or any of those things. I bet you then, if you had a weapon to defend yourself with, then they would not mess with you whatsoever and you'd be completely safe. However, it might be a little bit more difficult to get a gun to protect yourself with because of the stricter gun laws you passed. So good luck with that. But, okay, gun laws is not part of the article. Whatever, let's move on. It's not really that important. Her next point is paid family leave and childcare. America is behind other countries. There's a lot more information in this one, so this one will take longer to go over, and again, we'll go over this point by point. The United States is an outlier among developed countries when it comes to a paid family leave and medical leave, which allows people time off to care for a newborn, help a sick family member, or recover from a serious illness. The Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, provides up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave, but according to the National Partnership for Women and Families, fewer than 40% of workers qualify for it. Some employers offer paid family leave, but the group says it covers only 14% of workers. California, New Jersey, and Rhode Island have implemented paid family leave laws, and New York and the District of Columbia are in the process of enacting them. So when it comes down to it, she's basically saying the United States does not have paid family leave, even though all of the other big countries do. But we do have the Family Medical Leave Act. However, it does not cover everybody. And there's also a little bit of paid family leave in America, but even that is scarce. I was honestly surprised that she brought up the Family Medical Leave Act because that is usually used as a counter to this argument. It provides up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. That is a fact. That is completely true. The real issue right now, though, is paid leave, not unpaid leave. People are trying to get paid leave passed while they get paid while they go off to take care of a sick family member or take care of a newborn, etc., etc. However, the problem I have with this is she continues to state, but according to the National Partnership for Women and Families, fewer than 40% of workers qualify for it. Now that blew me away right there because it is completely illegal to deny workers family medical leave, and that only 40% of workers actually followed that law. That's way off. So I had to go and check out the source to see what on earth she was talking about, where she got this information from. So this was the source she linked to, and right there circled in red was, I'm assuming, the quote that she used for her information. It states, but only 15% of workers in the United States have access to paid family leave through their employers, and fewer than 40% have access to personal medical leave through employer-provided short-term disability insurance. Now, for those of you who don't know what short-term disability insurance is, I looked it up for you. If you're suddenly unable to earn a paycheck due to illness or in an accident, short-term disability insurance through your employer can replace a portion of your income during the initial weeks of your disability. That is paid leave. You're paid as you take time off because of an illness or something else. That is paid family, it's paid leave. Meanwhile, over here, she's saying that fewer than 40% of workers qualify for the Family Medical Leave Act. She straight up misquoted her source. They should retract the article just for that. If my English professor ever saw me doing that, she would give me an F right then and there for doing that. You can't just misquote a source and get away with that. That's not something you just do every day. That is straight up lying misquote a source and then talk about how only 14% of workers have paid family leave. So I went to the study she was referring to, and it seems pretty legit. Now, the study did a survey on a law that was passed in an area of California where employees could receive up to 6 weeks of paid family leave at 55% of their weekly earnings, up to about $1,000 a week. She was referring to the chart on the top right there, how there was no noticeable effect or a positive effect on turnover and morale. Now, I have a couple problems with this study. One is they lumped no noticeable effect and positive effect together. This is important because, two, they had stated public awareness of PFL remains limited. More than half of them did not know the program existed. And then nearly a third of respondents who were aware of PFL but did not apply for it when they needed a family leave reported that they felt the wage replacement was too low. And then also about 37% for whom the data was available for were worried that if they took it, their employer would be unhappy. And now when you combine that with putting no noticeable effect and positive effect together, you will find that there's going to be a big issue. So about 2/3 of people did not know about it, and over a third of those who did know about it did not use it. That could easily add up to about 75 to 80% of people not using the paid family leave. If about 75 to 80% of people didn't use it, there would be about a 75 to 80% no noticeable effect. And if you apply that to productivity, that would leave about 8.8% had a positive effect, and leaving about 12% having a negative effect. Now, is that what happened? I don't know, because they lumped no noticeable effect and a positive effect together. So those numbers really are pretty skewed in favor of the paid family leave. And secondly, the study is not representative of how paid family leave would fare on a national scale. She referenced earlier how the US was an outlier compared to other countries. So imagine if the US had what Germany or Japan have, which is 58 weeks of paid family leave. This study only covers 6, and that would be a massive increase. Plus, let's increase about $1,000 per week, which many people found wasn't enough, and let's increase that to about maybe $1,500 a week, something that more people can afford. And then, let's make sure that everybody knows rather than less than half. Then you would see much greater effects, and most of that being much greater negative effects on these businesses. This study's findings were very limited, and they even acknowledged that in the end. When you have a study like this that is so limited in its findings, you can't use that to suggest that all of a sudden a fully waged paid family leave would work on a national scale. In fact, you could make the argument that this source in itself goes against her argument rather than helps. If the author wants to suggest that paid family leave would be good for businesses, then the author is going to have to use some other study. She also goes on to say family leave also have significant positive effects on young children's health, fathers' involvement, and breastfeeding rates. That's obvious, and paid family leave would be nice to have, but we don't know about how much of a negative effect it would have on businesses, and that's the problem. If you don't have a source that effectively backs up your point, then your point therefore will be invalid. The author then goes on a rant about how universal pre-K in America would help lead to better childhood development and lower high school dropout rates and criminal activity and such. But I have absolutely zero idea what on earth this has anything to do with the topic of the article, what men have that women don't. There isn't universal pre-K for men only or something like that. I really do not understand why this is in the article at all. The author's next point in the article: abortion was legal then and now, but... And then she talks about how abortion is legal, but there's many anti-abortion policies that are being pushed into action throughout different states, specifically Arkansas, she talks about. But again, this doesn't really have anything to do with the article. They already have abortion. So the topic of the article is what men have that women don't. All I can gather from this is that women have a fear that abortion is going to be outlawed. But that should not be something that men have that women don't. Is a fear, is a lack of a fear, that so to speak. Abortion should mean as much to the mother as it does to the father. If you believe that abortion is not as important to the father as it is the mother, okay, fine, you know what, fine, he can have that, okay? I'm not going to argue that. Abortion is a controversial topic we could talk all day about. But let's stick on the topic, what men have that women don't. Men do not have the fear of losing abortion, which is false, but you know what? If you want to go with that, let's go with that, okay? Just for the sake of the argument, okay? Do women really have the fear of losing abortion? The reality of this situation is that 51% of women are against abortion. At least that's what I've heard from countless sources reliable on both sides of the spectrum. So really, if you were to leave it up to the woman, abortion would be outlawed. Well, I mean, except of the 1% of cases, which is the rape cases, I'm sure that would still be allowed. But for the most part, really, the main chunk of abortions, the 99%, would be outlawed if it was left up to the woman. So really, this is, again, it's not a valid point if more women are against it than for it. Her next point, equal pay for equal work. And oh god, this was a long one. I spent more time on this than all of the other ones combined. I'm going to be on this point for quite a while. And the amount of ignorance portrayed in these paragraphs, it hurts my head. It really does. This was the one section that pissed me off the most. Equal pay for equal work. The wage gap is narrowing but has barely budged in the last decade, according to the nonprofit Institute for Women's Policy Research. Overall, women earn 80 cents for every dollar earned by men, according to the National Partnership for Women and Families, with black women earning 63 cents and Latinas earning 54 cents. Critics argue these figures do not reflect factors such as occupation or experience. One can't say they compare the salary of a female teacher to that of a male lawyer. But economists say even when those controls are present, a wage gap persists. Female doctors, for example, are paid about $20,000 less a year than male doctors. And then she includes a chart to show how men make $1, women make 80 cents, black women make 63 cents, and Latina women make 54 cents. Now, what I would normally say to the wage gap argument is that it doesn't account for occupation, positions, hours worked, etc. But the author pointed that out for me. So while reading this, I became very interested to see her argument against that. Well, as it turned out, her argument was a bust. So first things first, she says critics argue those figures do not reflect factors such as occupation or experience. And then she goes on to say, but economists say even when those controls are present, a wage gap persists. Now, she didn't give me a source, as you can see, to where she got who these economists. I've never heard anyone say that. I really, seriously, have never heard anyone say that. And I've done my fair share of research on this. And I've never heard an economist say that a wage gap persists even when all of the control factors are present. Just a quick edit in I'm putting in after editing it. You don't see anything here because I don't have the pictures anymore. I don't know where they went. I lost them or something. I think the PowerPoint crashed and I just didn't have it saved or anything. So anyways, it's blank. But what I wanted to say was, when I say that I've never heard an economist say that a wage gap doesn't persist when all the factors are present, I don't mean just some of the factors like occupation, etc. I mean every single factor. And now, though it's probably impossible to account for every single factor, which is why you would never hear an economist say when all of the factors are present. Now, when there are some present, yes, there is a bit of a wage gap, but then again, there are also other factors that have to be taken into consideration, like hours worked and dedication, etc., that you can't quite measure statistically. But you know what? Maybe she's right. Maybe an economist did say that, and I just missed it, or I didn't hear them. Well, I would like to go see who this was, but she didn't provide a link, and therefore, that whole entire sentence right there is invalid. And she's making claims without backups. And she's basically quoting someone without saying or without giving a source for where she's getting the quotation from. She could have been making that up for all I know. And I was taught from elementary school, all the way back to elementary school, that if I don't quote my source, then I'm going to get an F on that paper, right? That's what they taught me in elementary school, middle school, high school. I always got an F if I didn't quote my source. This is a professional writer for USA Today, a major company. Why is she not doing this? Why is she not quoting her sources? Now you'll say, oh, but afterwards she does, where she says female doctors are paid about $20,000 less a year than male doctors. Or, maybe not in that voice, but... Now, that's one hasty generalization, that female doctors are paid on average about $20,000 less a year than male doctors. That was a major number. So I went to go check it out because I was like, oh my god, are you kidding me? Well, I'll be damned if she didn't misquote her source again. Her source for female doctors are paid on average $20,000 less a year than male doctors are the sex differences in physician salary in U.S. public medical schools. Physicians in U.S. public medical schools are not representative of all doctors as a whole. It's only a specific area, a specific field with specific people. And she completely misquoted that. She completely took that out of context. Okay, but misquotation aside, there's still a wage gap in physicians in U.S. public medical schools. At least according to the source anyways, right? Well, the source does a good job trying to account for some factors, but doesn't account for all factors. It didn't account for how well each person performs their job, nor did it account for men asking for raises more, which would lead to an increased chance of a raise, nor did it account for dedication, of which men on average are more dedicated to their work as compared to family and lifestyle than women, nor did it account for the numbers of hours worked, of which men tend to work more hours than women. Now, granted, it is hard to account for these factors, but nevertheless, the data will still be skewed if these factors are not accounted for. And then finishing up with this part is she talks about how Latinas and black women are paid even less, and she doesn't give any sources like she did with the female doctors. And then going back to the paragraph we were just at, she talks about how black women and Latina women are paid even less. Again, I would say that doesn't account for a multitude of factors. Even if they were paid less, it still has absolutely nothing to do with the topic of the article in the first place. Race and gender are two different things. She quotes Claudia Golden, a Harvard University labor economist. I hope I didn't mispronounce that name. The majority of the current earnings gap comes from within occupation differences in earnings rather than from between occupation differences. Now that's a flurry of words. It was hard for me to say all that without getting confused as to what she was saying. But basically what she's saying is that most of the wage gap comes from a difference in the earnings in the same occupations rather than a difference in earnings because of different occupations. Meaning a female lawyer earning less than a male lawyer accounts for more of a wage gap than a female teacher earning less than a male doctor. Now, Golden may be right. Most of the wage gap may be from the same occupational wage differences. But, as I said earlier, that is not accounting for men working on average more hours, men be more willing to move and to move to more dangerous places, men be more willing to ask for a raise, men be more willing to put aside family for work, etc., etc. The Equal Pay Act forbids sex-based wage discrimination, but women's rights advocates say it's poorly enforced. Now, I have a couple of things to say to that. One is that it is extremely hard for the government to enforce something like that. They would literally have to go from company to company, employer to employer, and ask exactly why and how much they pay each separate person and determine if the employer is giving different wages solely based on gender, of which I can guarantee you that even if that employer was doing that, he would come up with some BS excuse as to why the men were making more than the women. So it is extremely hard to enforce something like that. But why depend on the government to do everything when you can do it for yourself? You can always go up to your coworkers, ask how much they make, compare it to how much you make, determine if you're working harder than your coworkers, and if you're that much better than your coworkers yet you're still making less, then you can report it to the government and you can get an investigation, see if your employer is paying you wrongfully because of your gender, and it will be enforced. So even if it is poorly enforced, which it very well could be because it is extremely hard to enforce that, you can enforce it yourself, investigate yourself, and then you can get the government involved. Because the government will enforce it. The only problem is that it's hard for them to find cases where this actually happens. So what I have to say to this is to go out and enforce it yourself. That's the only guaranteed way you're going to make sure that it is properly enforced. The wage gap is worse for women with children who face a steep mommy tax. Motherhood is tied to a 4% decrease in earnings per child, while fatherhood is tied to a 6% increase, according to a 2014 study by UMass Amherst sociology professor Michelle Buddig. Oh, I probably butchered so many words in that sentence. And the penalty for mothers is worse for low-income women who can least afford to pay it. She isn't seriously insisting that employers are paying women less because they have children, and solely based on the fact that they have children. Does she not realize that caring for a child is extremely difficult? Work performance is bound to decrease when a woman has a child. Plus, she's probably going to have to take more time off, resulting in a lower paycheck. And then fathers, on the other hand, are more willing to put more time into work to get more money to pay for that child. Now you can say, oh, well, that's just sexist. Well, no, it's not sexist when she's referencing to statistics on average. I can use statistics on average back. Women on average are the primary caregivers of children, and therefore, women on average will have a decrease in work performance and thus a decrease in earnings per child. Now, if you saw earlier, this chart was right here in the middle between these 2 points. The picture really did not have anything to do with the points before or after it. A few paragraphs down later, though, it matches up with the argument she's presenting, so I will include it down there. I don't know why the picture is way up here in the article, but she put it there. I'm going to move it down to where it belongs. Women are also less likely to ask for high compensation, and studies show they are penalized more than men for trying to negotiate. What I have to say to this is, so what? Do you see how she's trying to make this seem like a sexist issue? As if they're penalized more for trying to negotiate just because they are women. That's simply not true, and I'll get onto that in a second. But let's touch on the first point she makes. Women are less likely to ask for high compensation. So what? All you are doing is explaining part of the reason why there is a wage gap in the first place. Women still have the ability to do so. I really don't see what her point is in including this in the article. And now for her second point, she references a source or a study. Employers don't look at the individual asking for a raise and be like, you know what? You're a woman. I understand that you're less likely to ask for a higher compensation, but I don't care. I'm still going to penalize you more than men. That's not what happens. The reason women are penalized more for attempting to negotiate a raise has to do with the individuals. These are just on average how women fare doing this. It has nothing to do with sexism. Since all the author of the article said was that women are penalized more than men for trying to negotiate, I thought I would just go to the source that she referenced to make my rebuttal. She's not really creating her own argument, she's just kind of stealing it from the author of the source, so she didn't really make her own argument, she just kind of quoted the source and used the source as argument, just kind of like stole it from the guy. No, there are actual reasons, believe it or not, that things like this happen other than sexism. Wow, could you believe that? The source even pointed it out here, as you can see. So these are just snippets of some of the portions of the source that she used. I didn't want to do a full-length review of the source because that source is not what I'm rebuttaling. I'm rebuttaling her argument, so I'm not doing a full review of the source, just a small parts. And since I'm not doing a full review of her source, I'm just going to use a few parts of it to help explain my points a bit and provide backup as to why it's not just sexism, it's actual reasons as to why things like this are happening. So the thing I got on the left here is that only 7% of female students attempted to negotiate as compared to 57% of men. That's a 50% difference. That is drastic. And it puts into perspective just how much more comfortable men are trying to negotiate than females. And again, part of the reason why men, on average, ask for raises more often is because they are just simply more comfortable doing it than women. The next paragraph in the middle here reiterates on my last point about how men are more comfortable making negotiations. So the source states, nervousness about attempting to negotiate explain this gender difference. Because men were much more comfortable and less nervous about attempting to negotiate, they fared better off than the woman did. Now, before you go off and say, oh, but wait, they said with a male evaluator it only explained the gender difference. No, actually, they go on to say it was the same for female evaluators with females. The females were still much more nervous to negotiate than men. It's not just the male employers that are doing this, it's the female employers. So it's not sexism. So basically, one of the biggest reasons that women are penalized more than men for trying to negotiate is that females displayed much more nervousness than men did. That's not a woman's issue, that's not a societal issue, that's an individual's issue, that's an individual's problem. Overcoming nervousness is a personal issue that you have to fix yourself. There is not a thing in the world that anybody can do except for the individuals themselves about helping them overcome their nervousness for negotiating a raise. The paragraph on the right there kind of reiterates on the point the second paragraph is making, is that males just portray themselves to be much more comfortable with negotiating for a raise than females. Females portrayed themselves much more inappropriately as compared to men when asking for a raise, and thus they were penalized greater. I will agree to the extent that this is more of a woman's issue than a men's issue, but that does not make it a woman's rights issue that society needs to conform to. Asking for a raise is something that everyone struggles with. Simply because men have better chances than women do does not mean anything when you look into it. On the surface, this may seem like a sexist issue. That's what the author wanted to happen. But when you go and read the 20-page long study she used, which I'm pretty sure she did not expect most people to read it, and thus she used that to her advantage, you will realize that the study does not portray this to be a problem because of society's sexism towards women. The author established absolutely nothing with the statement when you look deeper into the argument. All she established here was that men were more likely to negotiate and on average fared better than women when trying to negotiate. That really does not mean anything. That's just numbers. Look at it this way. It'd be like if I said men were less likely to enter childhood education as their field of work, and on average received lower compensation than women. So what? Does that mean there's a problem with society? No, those are just numbers. They are not representative of each individual on their own. If you let numbers represent who you are, then you will have major setbacks in your life. And that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to get society to fall back on these numbers and say, these numbers are showing that there is a problem in our society, and they're living by the numbers rather than as themselves as individuals. I think I've said enough for such a short argument. Jesus, that's a tongue twister. Such a short. Say that 10 times fast. Oh my god, it took me like 10 retakes of saying that sentence to get it, but whatever. Okay, moving on. The author's next section of her article was an anecdote about Kellyanne Conway being absolute garbage at negotiating a speaking fee. Do you want to know why she was absolute garbage at negotiating a speaking fee? Basically, it was because she was nervous and uncomfortable. Wow, could you believe that? Exactly what the study said. Now, I'm kind of confused as to the origin of this story. I don't know if they asked her for her speaking fee right when they asked her if she wanted to speak in the first place, or if they're asking for her speaking fee for an event that she had already signed up for, which is actually what she sounds like she's describing. And if that's the case, this is absolutely retarded, because why would you sign up for an event and then not know how much you want to be paid for speaking there? She didn't even have to negotiate. She didn't even say a price. She was just like, I'm going to have what he's having. That's not even trying. I thought it was a silly anecdote to put in her argument, but you know what? Whatever. You can read it if you want. Critics of equal pay interventions often frame the debate around women's personal choices, while equal pay advocates say it should focus on how the structure of American work does not align with the realities of American life. According to the Pew Research Center, women make up nearly half the workforce and are breadwinners in 40% of households with children. Yet they are more likely than men to make compromises when the needs of children and family members collide with work, which they say negatively impacts their careers. And then on the right there is the chart I said I would include later, where it belongs, and I believe this is where it belongs. Now what I've been doing is exactly what she said the critics have been doing in the first sentence, forming the debate around the woman's personal choices. Now what she is saying here is that the structure of the American work does not align with how American life really is, quote unquote. That since women make up nearly half the workforce, the wages and the careers and households should be relatively the same between women and men. But the explanation for that comes back to the individual's argument, the personal choices. Women generally choose lower paying jobs than men. That's not a choice society made for them, that's a choice they made for themselves. She also states, yet they are more likely than men to make compromises when the needs of children and family members collide with work. And it goes to show how men care more about work than family as compared to women, and thus creating a larger wage gap between men and women. But in the end, this all comes back to the personal choices argument. Society is not forcing these women to choose lower paying jobs on average than what men choose. And society is not making them more likely than men to make compromises for their family. This is not an example of male privilege, these are the choices that the women are making themselves. What I was expecting from her is to present an argument about how society is helping women make these choices that they make. Maybe because of a fear that maybe one field is dominated by men and they're too scared to go into it. But she doesn't present the argument, so I can't really rebut that. So this is a quote by someone named Crenshaw, I don't really know who that is. There are long-standing beliefs that there are separate roles and responsibilities for women. Women are different, and so they make these choices, and some part of this inequality is simply the product of choices women make, Crenshaw said. You can't blame all of the inequality women face on difference. It's not difference, it's a matter of power. Who gets to decide what a worker is? Who gets to decide what the implications of reproduction are? And whose vision is a worker basically somebody who has no childcare responsibilities? Now again, I've been doing what she says people are doing, is blaming it on the woman's choices that they make. Now I've been doing what she says people have been doing, is blaming it on how women are different, so they make different choices than men. But she's coming out and saying, no, it's not a matter of that women are different than men. It's a matter of power. Now, I don't know who this power is that she is talking about. If it's like God speaking to these people and telling them if they're a worker or a caregiver or something like that, I really don't understand what this power is, quote unquote. But I can assure you that it is not this quote unquote power that is preventing women from becoming workers and such. It's the person themselves who gets to decide if they're a worker or a caregiver, etc. If they want to work, they can work. That's their choice. There's not a judge out there who's deciding what people are. This isn't a beehive. This isn't an ant colony where all the ants are assigned to different assignments to accomplish throughout their days. No, people get to decide what they want to do with their lives. To simply blame a quote-unquote power for a female not getting the job is avoiding the problem. They're not going to get anywhere by putting blame on everyone else but themselves. I'll tell you what, next time someone asks me why I do not have a good paying job yet, I'll just blame it on a power. Say, you know what, I'm not going to get a good paying job because of this power that's deciding who I am and what I am. I won't know who that power is, but apparently someone has power over me that's deciding what I'm doing with my life. So yeah, it's no revelation that I think this quote by Crenshaw is pretty silly. Alright, we're finally done with the wage gap area in her argument, and now we're moving on to women in politics. Much shorter this time, which I'm glad about, because this article is pretty long. Political representation. At this rate, women will reach parity in 100 years. The number of women in politics is increasing sluggishly. Women are 51% of the population, but make up 19% of Congress and only a quarter of state legislatures. Women are on course to reach parity with men by 2117, according to the IWPR. Research shows women have different legislative priorities than men and are more likely to introduce bills addressing the needs of women and children. Jennifer Lawless, author of Women on the Run, Gender, Media, and Political Campaigns in the Polarized Era, said the chief reason for unequal political participation is that women, perceiving bias, are less likely to run than men. When they do, she said, they are elected at the same rates. Well, Jennifer Lawless is correct. If a woman would run, she would probably have the same chances of getting elected as her male counterpart. I think the real problem she's trying to address here is that women aren't running as much as they should be. Since women make up about half the population, half the candidates should be women. The only problem here is that women are less likely to run than men. And she quotes Jennifer Lawless, blaming it on a perceived bias. That society doesn't believe women should be in politics or something like that. I would not want someone running for me who is scared about how others see of them and thus are afraid to run in the first place. Now, I gotta be honest with you, I would not vote for someone who is scared of how others think of them. A good representative or a good leader is not someone who is scared of what people think of them. And if you're making the argument that it's not that the women are afraid of how people see them, is that they're afraid they're not gonna win in the first place, well, that just goes to show that they're unmotivated. You see, I'm not against women in Congress or run as president or whatever. If they're good at the job, they're good at the job. They're not going to not vote for someone just because they're a male or a female. They vote for people based on their policies and how good of a leader and representative they would make. From a voter perspective, the IWPR said more women are turning out to the polls, but many states are passing measures that make it harder to vote, including reducing polling sites and enacting stricter voter ID laws, which disproportionately affect vulnerable communities. Fewer polling places mean longer lines, a burden on less advantaged voters who tend to have less flexibility with work and childcare arrangements. Now, I don't know exactly why she's bringing up that voting is getting a little bit harder in the essence of this article. The topic of the article is what men have that women don't. I want to believe that she is suggesting that since voting is getting harder, it is putting a burden on poorer communities. But she put it in an article about men versus women. Almost as she is insisting that voting is getting harder so women aren't going to go to vote as much. Now that seems sexist as hell. Basically, it's calling women lazy. Saying that since it's harder to vote that less women are going to go vote and men don't have to deal with this. In the essence of the article, that's what it seems like she is insisting. And like I said, I want to believe that she is suggesting it is hurting poorer communities. But putting it in an article with the topic what men have that women don't, I find that really hard to believe. I really don't know what this is doing in the article if she is not insisting that women are going to vote less as compared to men because it's harder to vote. Because besides that, this does not belong in the article at all. And if that's the case, that's the reason this is in the article, then she's being sexist as hell, calling women lazy, basically. She then includes a quote by Nancy Young, which I'm not even going to read because it has absolutely nothing to do with the topic of the article. She's talking about race, not gender. Like, yeah, that's an argument we can get into, but it has nothing to do with the argument the author is presenting. So you can read it if you want. I'm not going to get into it. The rest of the article is kind of like the introduction. It gives background and information and such. It doesn't really have anything much to do with the argument. It talks about modern day feminism and such, but it doesn't really have much to do with the argument, so I'm not going to go over it. So that's the end of the article. I'm going to stop here. So my final thoughts on the article. The article is ridiculous, and the writer should be fired for it. It has misquotations interlaced with pure hypocrisy and pointless rants that have nothing to do with the article. Yet, she is a writer for a major news source. I'm not hating on USA Today, but I cannot believe it employs people like this. I was genuinely blown away by this article. Not because it presented good arguments, but because it just had so much ignorance in it that it hurt my head. I don't know if it was just the author's ignorance, or if she was trying to hit on the reader's possible ignorance, but I am tired about talking about this article. As you can see, this video is almost an hour long, and my head just hurts from the ignorance portrayal. So, you know what? I'm done with this article. You guys probably didn't enjoy that because it's my first one. It was probably terrible. But you gotta start somewhere, right? Thank you guys for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. And leave your comments down below. I'd like to hear your opinions, if you agree or disagree with me. And if I missed a point in the article and you would like me to go over it, please feel free to point it out. Or let me know your thoughts on this video. Provide constructive criticism. Tell me how to get better at this. But that's all I got for now. I am worn out from this. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time.